Okay, boys, another episode of the podcast. MG, I'm going to start with you. A question came in specifically for you, and I love that you are sitting exactly where you're sitting, because the question is, why does MG keep looking out the window?
Oh, maybe MG's probably got a little bit of ADHD and can't sit still. You know what? Oh, fuck, I am so fidgety, am I? I can't help it. You know what? Even when I think I'm focusing on really sitting still, and I'll watch a bit of an episode back, I'll be like, fuck, MG, sit still, man. Seriously. I can't help it. I don't even realize I'm looking out the window. Good observation, and I will do better to look straighter at the screen moving forward. But yeah, I can't help it. And if it's not the window, it's a wall, or it's an item, or I'm fidgeting, or it's just the way my brain works. But yeah,
because you obviously do it at your house, which has a window there, but also in your office there's a window, so that wherever you do it, there's a window.
You know what it'll be? A lot of the times I'll hear a noise and I'll be like, oh, what was that? But yeah, I am live on a podcast, so I will be more attentive moving forward. Thank you for whoever's picked that up. But just know I am very, very aware of it, and I'm working on it.
Everyone that watches this now is going to be more attentive and watching you to see if you do that.
For sure. But just know it is those like little things that also I think make me a good coach, because I'm always hyper focused on lots of things, and I think it helps me to be a good coach. But did I give you boys the update on what happened to me with my stupid knee?
No. Tell us a bit. You said that something happened. So
yeah. So basically, for anyone who doesn't know, I have had 3 knee reconstructions already, and it's 2024. So end of 2022, I had an arthroscope on my left knee because it was playing up again after 3 ACLs. Had the meniscus cleaned out. Yesterday, I was at work. I was picking up a cable which had a handle attachment on it from the bottom of the machine, only 5 kilos on it, to pass that handle to an athlete that I was coaching. As I rotated around to pass on that 5 kilo handle, I just felt this massive pop in, again, the same left knee. It buckled, gave way. I fell to the floor, and it blew up instantaneously. Massive amounts of blood and edema in there. And went to the GP straight away. I've got an MRI book, but looking like I have done the meniscus again. So, fuck me if I was a racehorse, which I'm far from a racehorse, let me tell you. They would put me down straight away, but potentially looking, I've just come off the back injury and avoided that surgery. Maybe now to have a knee surgery again, but we'll see what happens.
That's correct. That's like so unfortunate.
But probably nobody listening, and you guys are surprised knowing that it's me.
And it's also annoying too when you do something like that and it's not even during training.
Yeah, and I've done none of my big things have been an impressive story. I have the least impressive surgery stories in the history of mankind. Actually, and then I watched Scotty's video of him taking 168 plates for a ride, just getting back into it, and here I am, and I can't even pick up a 5 kilo cable.
Yeah, Scotty just hack squatting, the whole stack, and no more weights can go. Oh, just getting back into it, just warming up.
MG can't even do a pull-off press.
That's very good by you, bro.
Thanks,
that is very good.
Thanks.
Actually, Scotty, give us a training update. But I'm gonna go to an ACL question that we got a while ago that I never got to answer, but we're gonna go through in a second. Scotty, give us a training update.
Okay. As in, like, what have I been doing, or?
Yeah, like you're back, you're in your own gym now. Are you finding that you're making better progress than what you were before? And have you changed your program around yourself, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so programming is a little bit different now because I was obviously training at a commercial gym. We're at David Lloyd's, which is a big health club chain over in the UK, but it's nice being back in my own gym and having pieces that I've hand selected for my gym and that I obviously really enjoy using. So I have noticed a pretty big difference in terms of performance. Firstly, just in terms of how my body feels, because I was driving so much in the car. I said to you boys, I was spending some days, over 5 hours driving 2.5 hours up to the stadium, then 2.5 hours back at night. And just my hips and my lower back were just not really loving that, to be honest. And so now that I'm back and I'm able to literally just get in the car for 60 seconds and I get out and I'm at the gym, it's definitely a lot better. But even being back on, fortunate enough to have some really good barbells and, being back on the hack squat yesterday was amazing, although my legs are paying for it today. But the gym that we're training at over there, they didn't have a squatting piece. So I wasn't really doing any axial loading with the exception of some Smith machine split squats, but they had one Smith machine. So most of the time it wasn't really there. So it'd be like a unilateral leg press, or doing a lot of heavy dumbbell split squats. So it was just nice to be able to get underneath a little bit of weight again and get after it. And equally, even just deadlifting again, being able to pull off the floor and have good quality plates and the bar that I want to use and be able to play the music that I want, not have to wait for things. I'm very spoiled compared to most people. When you go into a gym, you've got to share your equipment. Whereas when I'm training, I like to be able to use what I want when I want to use it. So training's been really, really good. And I feel like I'm back to being the best physique athlete that I can be in terms of how I'm preparing like my push-up phase. Because over there, it was, as much as I was definitely still training hard, I was probably a little bit more, bodybuilding was probably taking a backward seat compared to all the other stuff that I was having to do, versus now I'm starting to be, a lot more intentional and got that drive and hunger back to get after it. So yeah, man, it's going good.
That's awesome. I saw you were wearing knee sleeves when you're doing the squatting. Is that something that you use for a lot of other lifts too, or do you tell
so I use them with my squat. So to be honest, I wasn't quite sure if they were going to fit because I was using when I was in prep before I left, and I was a little bit thinner / leaner than I am now. But it's the first time I'd worn them in really since probably October, since before I left. So I wear them when I squat or any kind of just split squat, anything where it's going to be heavy. Whether it's just placebo, again, there's no research to say that you can lift more when you're wearing knee sleeves. If you've got wraps, different story, because that makes an enormous difference. But anyone that's squatted in wraps before knows how extremely painful that is. But in terms of sleeves, it just helps my knees feel really warm, and I just feel maybe a little bit more confident. I don't feel as like grindy. I'm not 25 years old anymore. So as you know, you get a few more aches, and MG knows a few more pains. So it just feels a little bit better. And so I've always just, well, when I say always, for the most part, whenever I'm performing any sort of big squat pattern, I've usually worn the SBD sleeves. But again, as soon as that movement's done, like if I'm going to get on leg extensions, I'll usually take them off because otherwise they tend to restrict a little blood flow once you start to get a pump, and then that becomes very, very painful. So once the squats and the split squats are done, I usually ditch them. But in the colder weather, I definitely find a big difference in terms of wearing them, in terms of how I feel. And I feel like anything that makes you feel good and that you feel is going to give you a bit more confidence, especially if you're going after a big lift or a big squat, then why not?
Yeah,
I've literally just taken mine off. I'm wearing one permanently now just because of the injury that I've got, purely, as Scotty said, from a mental thing, just to know that I'm lacking stability because there's so much edema in there. So having this on just gives me that connection to that area, so I don't try and twist too fast or do anything silly. So
yeah, and I also find, like, especially after doing my squatting session yesterday, so I didn't just jump under a 4-plate squat either side. I obviously do your warm-up sets, but once I've gone through them, start to notice that you get a bit more blood flow directed to your targeted tissue, but they're actually quite tight on my knees, so they feel tight, and equally I get a lot more blood build up, and I always do leg extensions before I squat so that I don't have to squat as heavy and I can kind of pre-fatigue my legs a bit. And so that difference alone, knowing how much cellular swelling I can already experience, like a really controlled negative, I just feel like I can feel every single muscle fiber being stretched. And so again, that, I guess, muscle mind connection, I notice a big difference versus if I'm not wearing the sleeves. Do I still have a pump? Yeah, but it's not on the same level.
You brought up a good point about you doing the extensions before you squat, and you mentioned pre-fatiguing. Is that something that you utilize a lot of? And do you use it for a fact of pre-fatiguing, or do you use it for warming up, blood flow, and not really worrying about fatiguing the muscle before you go into that compound lift?
To be honest, I think all of the above. So when you're younger, one of the first things you learn when you go to university, do an exercise science degree, they talk about exercise order, and you pick your big compounds first, which is great. But as you start to get older, the way that you direct your training and your training stimulus, I think you become a lot more intentional and a lot more considerate around what you're doing and when you're doing it. And so for me, I'm thinking about, okay, so the goal is not to just move the load from, point A to B, it's to direct and target stress to the specific tissue. So for me, a leg extension prior to a squat pattern is something that I've done probably for the last 2 years, because it allows me, firstly, to get a lot of really good blood flow and to create some of that cellular swelling. So once I jump straight in, I feel like I'm using the muscles that I'm trying to target. and there's that connection straight away. But equally, I do like creating a little bit of fatigue in terms of peripheral fatigue without accumulating the systemic fatigue, because if you're going to perform a squat, places a lot more stress on the central nervous system than, say, a leg extension per se. And equally, I have over the last probably 6 to 9 months moved my leg extensions where I try and raise my hips, so hips are sort of at 40 degrees flexion, so that I'm getting a little bit more rec fem. Everyone knows about that paper that that came out about, we spoke about, I think, on the potty a few weeks ago about, getting more activation at the proximal end of the rec fem by just extending the hips a bit more. And so I notice a big difference by doing, I usually do, I think it's on the Tuesday session, it's 3 sets, working anywhere from 15 to 20. And then I'll usually do 1 or 2 clusters. I won't go to complete failure, but just to really make sure there's a lot of blood in there. And then getting on a squat, and then a split squat after that, and then a single leg press. I just feel like I'm connected with my quads the whole time. Whereas sometimes you'll find a lot of athletes who will squat first, and then they'll do their leg extensions at the end of the session. And by that stage, they're just completely nuked because that systemic fatigue has already obviously arrived. But I think if you can, and this is probably just being a bit more mature now and, knowing what I know now versus when you're younger, at the end of the day, I want to be able to get as much progress as I can without, placing as much, I guess, systemic stress on my body. Because if you're absolutely just spent after your first 2 sets of squats, then the likelihood is that the next, you might have 7 or 8 more sets on a quad-based movement. They're probably going to take a toll, and so you're not getting the most out of that. Versus if you were to take a different approach, maybe you're squatting a little bit less. Maybe if you did your squat first, you could do 5 plates either side. But equally, what does the rest of your session then look like? If you've just completely, ruined yourself and you have nothing left to give. So, and it's similar on a hamstring day as well. So I'll usually perform 1 or 2 sets, as you know, MT, of like some light activation, some potentiation sets to prime it. And then when you're going into a big hip hinge pattern, straight away, it's like, wow, my hamstrings are on. Maybe you might not be able to pull as heavy if you hadn't have done that prior, but I guarantee you from a proprioception and a tension awareness perspective, you notice a big difference.
Man, I'm so glad that you said that, bro, because for me, if I give an example of me, if I squat straight off the bat versus doing a leg extension first, I actually will lift more on my squat having leg extended first, purely because for that reason, I'm warmer, there's more blood in there. When I squat, as a first exercise, I find they're always, for the most part, feel like dog shit. Whereas when I leg extend first, my squats are always better. I go deeper, I go slower. And I get far more out of the exercise doing it that way. But, you'll always hear people say, oh, your compounds have to go first. As I've gotten older, I can't squat without leg extending first, man. Fact,
Yeah, there's a component of activation, warm-up, blood flow, which, people could argue you could do that just by doing a lot more warm-up sets of that actual exercise itself. So you could just do a lot of body weight squats or, put 1 plate on, then 2 plates on, then 3, and then work your way up to then your working set, which definitely works. I think, as you said, Scotty, there's a component too, is sometimes you need to get stronger in some of your isolation lifts first, because if you always put them at the end, you're never going to progress in them, right? So sometimes there's a reason for actually putting your isolation lifts first so that you can actually spend some time getting stronger in them. And they may not affect your next compound. They actually may help your next compound. So, as we always say, context is important and there's no right or wrong. And I guess it's always good to try both. And if you've never done it before and you never put isolation lifts before your compound, then maybe give it a go and see if it works for you. I know one of the reasons why I do it too is to help with activation, especially with glute stuff for females, is I might put a couple of glute isolation movements first before I give them a hip thrust or a glute bridge or something like that. Because, we always hear, I don't feel like I'm finding it activates my glutes when I do a thrust, or I can't really feel it. But if you do some other isolation lifts first, you might, okay, they're woken up now. I know how to fire them, and I know how to wake them up, and then they can use them in their compounds. So it was a good little rabbit hole we went down, but I'm glad that you mentioned it because I think it was really, really important. And I know it's something that you obviously put within your programming, because I know you obviously do my programming and it's in there. But you don't always do it with mine, because I know sometimes I do have leg extensions later, but you gave me maybe an adductor before I do my squats and things like that. So there's a lot of different nuances between programs, but I think if someone hasn't done it like that before, it's a good chance to give it a test run.
Yeah, and the adductor one's a good one too, because from that perspective, I don't know about you, but I found anecdotally and equally a lot of athletes finding that by opening up the adductors, putting some blood in there, even I do a lot of Cossack squats before I'll squat. I've had hip issues, and so it makes a big difference for me so before I'll actually do that hack squat, I'll always do leg extensions first, then I'll do adductors, literally just 2 sets to really stretch, open up, get some blood in there, and then I'll squat after that. And the difference in terms of hip mobility, in terms of where you can direct stress, blood flow, it's just the difference is night and day. And again, I think it's one of those things when you get older, you want to reduce the risk of injury while still try and heighten the reward from an activation and a cellular signaling perspective. And this is a good way to be able to do that, because I don't want to have to give up weights when I'm 45 years old because my knees are shot and my hips are shot, versus you can still get a really, really good result. And equally, I think over time you acclimate to it. Like once upon a time when you first run a leg extension and then you try squatting, someone might be like, right, cool, I'm going to try what Scotty suggested. And like, oh my God, I'm so much weaker in my squat. Yeah, maybe initially, but run that consistently for say 2-3 mesos, you'll acclimate pretty quickly. And then I guarantee if you were to like, maybe I'll try squatting first, the difference will be night and day in terms of how much load you can move, but you may not necessarily get that same stimulation that you will by doing the isolation movement before the compound.
Scotty, the rate I'm going, I'm not even going to make it to 45.
Yeah, I felt a bit bad saying that. I was like, just quit MG from that, because sometimes you just get a little bit of bad luck, bro.
But equally, it's not like I've been lifting heavy for forever. Like, I'm certainly not one of the strongest guys around. So I think a lot of it's just genetics as well, man. Like I think I've mentioned on previous potties.
Absolutely.
Replacement. She's not that old. My dad's having the same back surgery. So I think genetics. I mean, if you look at my family history, all of my cousins pretty much have had multiple ATLs as well.
Mm.
Yeah, so there's definitely a genetic predisposition for that. No doubt about that. And so that's what I mean. Sometimes you just cop some fucking bad luck.
All right, I'm going to move into the ACL question that we got a while back. I'm going to read it as is. I'm not going to try to summarize it. So I've had 3 ACL reconstructions and have significant weakness in my right hammy from having it grafted.
Hamstring graft?
Yeah. You already knew it. The size difference between the 2 hammies was quite noticeable when I was on stage. Should I be doing extra single leg hammy work on the weaker side to help it grow? I don't want to back off, as judging feedback was to get bigger in the lower half and not to have a difference there. So Scotty, if they've had a graft in their hammy to help with their 3 ACL reconstructions, would you and then now a size difference in the hammies, would you suggest doing more single leg? This is a pretty common question. One size is smaller than the other. What do I do? Do I do more on one side? Do I match the reps and the weight on the weaker side to the strong? Like, what do I do?
Well, I'm guessing they didn't have if it's their third one, they probably went to the hamstring graft last because it's the stronger tendon to be able to use. But
I said twice. They've grafted the hammy twice. Yep, out of the 3.
Oh, wow. Okay, so then there you go. There's probably a genetic predisposition, or maybe just some bad luck a couple of times in a row. But I think a lot of the time, and this is in my experience working with athletes rehabbing from ACL, it's a stretch and mobility issue too. So what happens is when, and MG will be able to relate because I've never had an ACL rehab, but obviously you have had a couple. I'm guessing that the tissue is very, very tight post-surgery. And so you need to work on pliability before you can talk about strengthening it. Think about a Lucker band and in terms of how far you can stretch that. And so when you first have that surgery and that tendon, you've had a piece of that cut out, I'm guessing it's super fucking tight. Like reach over and touch your toes. Can't do it.
Not even close, man. Never have been able to. I've had 3 hamstring grafts, so 2 from one side and actually 1 from the other side, even though my left knee, I've had it reconstructed 3 times. I've had 2 left side hamstring grafts and 1 right side hamstring graft. So both hammies to do the one knee. So scar tissue was an issue. And I think for me, going through that rehab process, there was never not a time when unilateral leg work was the main priority. Single leg hamstring curls, both lying and seated, a ton of flexibility and stretching type stuff as well. But, I had that same deficiency and strength difference and also size difference, but eventually it did catch up. It's just taken years and years. But I certainly didn't do any extra. It wasn't like I was doing 12 reps on the left side and 8 on the right, or 2 sets versus 3 sets. I kept everything matched. It was just a matter of time. And eventually I got back to where I was.
And that's usually the thing, because if you do decide, well, I can do a 45 kilo single leg hamstring curl on my left leg, but on my right leg, I can only do a 12.5. If you continue to go down that path, you're just creating a greater asymmetry. So I think if you're doing all of the rehab and the stretching, so before you even talk about loading it and strengthening it, you need to be able to stretch the tissue first. Because if you think about it, you know, let's take a step back and think about, if I want to try and grow the muscle, I need to be able to challenge it, you know, at least lengthen it. If I can't stretch it and lengthen it, how can I try and load it? So, you know, you need to get that right and really prioritize stretching, the mobility side of it. And then as a result of that, and even just using it again, you'll see tissue come back, because whenever you're immobilized, we know straight away we see a significant amount of muscular atrophy. That's just what happens. And there's things that we can do with increasing energy availability, increasing protein intake, because you usually see some anabolic resistance as well. Things like that can help mitigate the effects of that muscle wastage. But once you start using it again, it comes back. And I know it's probably not a sexy answer, but it really is just time and consistency doing those things. And then usually, in terms of how I would program, I steer away from bilateral based movements. It usually is unilateral based, so that you can correct that asymmetry, bring up the strength. But if you're patient and you're very diligent with your rehab, then majority of the time it does correct itself. But you know, I'm not going to sit here and say it's as easy as that, because there's an enormous amount of work that goes in, being patient, being consistent, and there's definitely an element of luck too. Everyone responds differently. Things like utilizing, you know, collagen and vitamin C. People have probably heard me talk about that before. I use it as a preventative issue, and equally, as soon as MG told me about his knee, straight away I was like, bro, make sure you're making those collagen jellies, you're getting in that, increase your protein intake, anything that you can do to try and help repair that connective tissue. But from a rehab perspective, yeah, don't overlook the importance of stretching and making sure that the tissue is pliable before you consider starting to load it. And definitely don't try and lean into creating more of an asymmetry.
Awesome. That was great. That was great. I think that was really good information for the person that asked that question, but for anyone else that maybe has an asymmetry or gone through a big injury, where you made a good point. You've got to be able to lengthen it and stretch it first before you can even train it. So, you know, making sure you set that foundation right. And then from there, it's just like any other progressive overload, right? You just need to train and give it a little bit of time and consistency.
Mm-hmm.
I want to change the pace a little bit. And a reason why this is actually a good question is because we can explain about the bridging between the 3 seasons now. So someone asked, how was Amy shredded enough for season B when she was planning to do season C? So I had Amy compete over the weekend in IFBB. Originally, we had her planned to do the Victorian show in season C. But we made a decision that we'd like for her to qualify for nationals early by doing this show. And therefore we could extend her prep or give her more time to peak for the nationals, which would be about 4 weeks later than when she was supposed to compete. So she was supposed to compete 1st of September. Now she's going to be competing later at the end of September. So what we were able to do is, obviously, when we decided to do this show, she was literally, 6 to 7 weeks out. So she was within striking range. She was only maybe about 1 kilo or 2 off her stage weight. So she was lean. She was lean enough, and she looked presentable and respectable. And she did really, really well in her show. And now what we've decided to do is, now that we don't need a peak for 6, 7 weeks time, we need a peak for 10, 11 weeks time, we now decide to actually bring her food up for a couple of weeks and give her a bit of a diet break, bring that food up a little bit, maybe even, help with some of the comp prep feels that are going on there. Maybe bring the metabolism up a little bit, maybe even make some gains during this time by putting her in a small little surplus, and then she'll be nice and fresh and recharged before we come back down to then peak for that show that's now 3 or 4 weeks later than what it had to be. So the reason I want to bring this up, Scotty, is because this is a perfect example on how would someone bridge between the 3 seasons now, when if you're going from winter to spring, or if you're going from spring to autumn or autumn to winter, there's now a shorter gap between all the seasons where maybe you might want to bridge. So do you want to talk around maybe how you would bridge someone, and if it would be very, very similar to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I have had countless conversations on this, both in theory in terms of what it would look like when we were trying to decipher where we would list our shows for next year, and equally, looking at your contest prep. We obviously were speaking about how we'd manage it, and in terms of if you were to do this season, what would it look like? We obviously spoke about the middle year season, the winter one. And so, straight away, my mind went into there's probably a couple of ways that you could do it. But in terms of, if you wanted to have a crack at the spring season, so the end of year season, the way that you've approached it with Amy is pretty spot on the money. If you've got someone that has a predisposition that can, potentially get lean quite quickly, and equally can hang out at a lower level body composition and exist and still function, then it's an opportunity to be able to do that, then maybe freshen up, bring food back up, gain for a little bit, and then cruise into the back end of the year. But I think if you're doing that winter season, you've obviously got the opportunity to either say, do you know what, I'm gonna look to do some of the back end shows of autumn, and then from that, you've essentially got a period. If we think about the shows basically finishing, what is it? The last show is it first week of June?
Yeah,
or was it last week in May?
Late May. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So if we say that there's a 7-week turnaround from when that show finished to when the last one was, if you decided to do that national show. So from there, if you're like, you know what, I want to do that winter show, you've got the ability, all right, cool. I'm going to take a 2 to 3 week, if you're in high end condition, or maybe it's just a 2-week diet break. We're going to bring food back up. We're going to gain about 2 kilos so we can just feel normal. And again, we're not going to be by any means recovered, but we can exist in a much better state. And then from there, you may decide to just gradually taper down on that 3rd and 4th week. And then obviously from there, you can really turn up the gas and make sure that you go again for that middle season push. Or on the other side, like what we're seeing, with Amy as an example, who, is ready early. Is she 100%? No, but was she definitely worthy to be able to step on stage clearly, because she did, extremely well. And then now that gives her the ability. I haven't discussed what you guys are planning to do, but I have no doubt you're probably pushing a bit more food, chill out for a bit. She's a pro in most feds, isn't she?
Yep, in ICN, NBA, all the natty feds, yep.
Okay, so she'll only do the pro shows, yeah?
That's right, yep.
Yeah, so her next show will actually probably be an IFBB Nationals, will it not?
That's right, and that's the reason why we've done it that way, is because now all her peak weeks are pretty much back to back. Yeah. Whereas the original plan would have made her do a show, have to wait like 8 weeks, and then peak again. So now doing this early qualifier, we've pushed her show closer to all the other shows, therefore she can just basically peak back to back.
Yeah, so regain some body fat, hang out, feel good, and then probably start to turn things up again, around that mid-August part, and start to, again, as everyone knows, I like to use the analogy of land the plane. So, you've come down and then you push back up. You're not going all the way back up to 30,000 feet, but you're at an altitude where you can lift, it's safe, you're fine, you're good. And then obviously you'll commence your descent, peak for that national show, and then, as you said, when you have back-to-back peak weeks, I feel like a lot of coaches and athletes feel that can be problematic, but equally as a coach, it's so much easier. And as an athlete, it's so much more enjoyable, because hopefully if you've done multiple shows, you've got really good data, the intervention that you need to run. And it's not like you're usually having to, suck down and hardcore deplete. You basically just wash off the look that you had presented. And hopefully if your athlete's ready, you don't have to do anything too crazy in terms of depleting, repleting. You want to make sure that you've saturated muscle glycogen levels and you maximize vascularity and you peak the look. But then you spend the next 3 days washing that off, and then you ideally just gradually linear load into the next show, and then it's literally rinse, repeat. If anything, sometimes I personally feel that the look gets better, and I don't necessarily it's because the peak gets better. I think that some of that systemic fatigue that you've accumulated over the last 6-7 months, it starts to dissipate, because training intensity is typically not really hard, with the exception of maybe the night of the show. If you're like my athletes, I usually get them to train, and then the next day is typically a really hard session, then they'll have a rest day, and then they're just gradually cruising into the show again. And so that, when you're inside out conditioned, is a lot easier and is a lot more enjoyable than it's like, I've done that show, now I'm going to dig and I've just got to tread water for 3 weeks, and then I've got to get myself up to go again, versus if it's just bang, it's so much easier.
Yeah. One of the biggest positives of also doing what we did is she got an opportunity to compete for the first time IFBB, and now she gets judges' feedback. And there's things that we can work on. There's things that we found within her presentation that we want to fix. So, and that's what we spoke about last time with NBA, how we're giving that people the incentive to do multiple state shows and fly around and be on tour with NBA, so that you can get all that feedback and you can improve show by show. And you get an opportunity to be in front of the same judges again and again and again, so they can see you improve. Now those judges know who she is. They know what she presented, and they'll be able to see her again and be able to see her improvements, which is a massive positive.
And there's no reason that you can't replicate that, because technically, if you say you decided to do 2 state shows in the middle of the year, this is say next year in 2025, you have then done a show to qualify. You can go to nationals. So if you're like, you know what, I then just want to chill and I'm going to do the back end season, because I know for me, that's my plan for the next time I get up. I'll do an IFBB show in the middle of the year, cruise and then obviously peak towards the back end, and then you can just line them up and knock them out. And it makes it so much easier. And I think that as time unfolds, we'll see more and more athletes and more coaches start to lean into that format. I think it's just people need to see how it can be done, and equally potentially experience it firsthand. And once you've done it, I think it'll just sort of be the way that it goes, and it gives athletes, more opportunity. We spend so much time dieting, the sacrifice, the discipline that you have to apply to compete, and this just gives you an opportunity to do a few more shows. Or maybe you just fall short on a pro card, you're in the mix. Do you have to wait another 2 years, or can you just come back up for air for a little bit and then just come back down and then run it back again? 6-7 weeks is not really a big time constraint, and it's not going to be overly deleterious to your long-term progress versus just saying, no, I'm done, and then I'm going to go back again in 3 years. If you're that close, I think sometimes it's the difference between, like I said, coming up for a breath and then going again.
Yeah, definitely. MG, do you have people planned next year that will probably do those back to all that bridging between the seasons?
Definitely, man. You know what I love about this, and I'm getting excited. You probably see me smiling while you guys have been talking about having this extra season, is when you think about like how a season goes, right? Typically you do a stage show, especially if you're a first-time competitor, you get some feedback, you wait 3 or 4 weeks, you do nationals. And what we see typically with people is, they'll do their first show, they'll land where they land, they'll improve, they'll do nationals, they'll have the best experience. Maybe they've moved up in placings, and then they're kind of done. Whereas a lot of the time you hear, if I just had another 4 or 5 weeks, I could get to that next level again. And all of a sudden we've now, that opportunity is now there. You're probably going to get yourself another 6 or 7. So you're going to have time for a break and then 5 weeks to improve. I think it's great. And I think for the most part, most of my season A competitors will go and do that, that mid sort of winter season, which is exciting. And I just think it gives people opportunity to improve. And we spoke about doing multiple states. Now we're talking about doing multiple seasons to give yourself more opportunities to be your absolute best, with some breaks in between that actually allow you the time to make the improvements that you want. I think that winter season, will start to produce some of the best quality, because you're going to get the season A competitors who take it further, and all of a sudden you're going to have, the best condition physiques in that mid-winter season.
I think you could be right. Like you've got those people that did season autumn and then decided, I reckon I can do better than this. Just give me a little bit more time, and they go for winter, and they're a different person.
Correct. Yeah, I think we're going to start to see that.
That is super exciting. And I think that there's probably some people out there that are going to plan just for winter and then do spring. But there's also some people that are probably going to do the autumn and be like, you know what, I'm most likely going to do winter too, because I've been waiting this long, I've been prepping this long, I've been training for this long. It'd be bad to just throw in the towel after one season. All right, I want to go.
You might have had multiple points of feedback. You might have had 2 shows where you got feedback from both. You're getting a little better at each, and the third one's going to be your best showing.
Yeah. All right. I want to move on to cardio. We actually got 2 competing questions, which is really, really interesting. How deep in prep do you introduce cardio, and do you try to prolong it as long as possible before adding it? And another question was, why do some coaches implement cardio at the start and early in the prep? Should it be a tool to be used later? So what one person is saying, should you try to use it later? And another saying is, why do people do it earlier? So I don't know if MG or Scotty, you want to tackle it first, but
we can tackle it together, I suppose. So it's so dependent on the individual, right? And it really depends on the athlete's starting position and how much they were doing prior, and also looking at that athlete's normal day and looking at what type of expenditure that athlete gets. Like I've got competitors who are super busy on their feet, expend a ton of calories and don't need it. And then you might have an athlete, who stays reasonably lean in the off season and doesn't need as much. And I've also got competitors who, have the type of metabolism that need a little bit more to produce a result, sit at a desk all day and are not active, and may need that as a type of expenditure. So the simple answer is, it's so individualized that there is no correct answer. For me, in an ideal world, I'd have an athlete starting prep, doing minimal amount of activity, so that I can then use, the bare minimum to overload them and create a bigger calorie deficit. So hopefully they're doing, a low amount of steps, 8,000 to 10,000. I would start by maybe increasing steps up to something like 12,000. But, for the most part, when athletes get down to that back end of prep and you're already on calories that are, would be low for that individual, utilizing things like cardio as a way of burning an additional 350, 700 calories per week, depending on how many sessions you're going to do, is a great tool to have up your sleeve. So I try not to give too much away from it at the start of a prep, because I want to use it when I really, really need it. But again, it just depends on who the athlete is and where they're starting from.
What do you think, Scotty?
Yeah, I agree with everything MG said. I think, again, it's a beautiful word. Context is important. Everyone's going to be unique in terms of their body fat set point, in terms of how much fat mass they need to lose. I think if you've done your job properly and you've had a really good pre-preparatory phase, or maybe you're just someone who has a genetic predisposition to be able to maintain a really, low level of body composition relative to most would be in the improvement season. So I think for me, I typically wouldn't employ it any earlier than it needed to be. And I think if you're having to run it too early, again, it's a tool that we use when we need to use it. But if you're playing that card too early, then it means that you just have to play more of it as time unfolds. But I also think about it in terms of the individual and their experience in prep. I think you think about all the things that we have to do as physique athletes to get to the level of condition that we get to, and the daily tasks of, we have step counts, we prepare our food, we need to be asleep at certain times, we need to train, we factor in time for posing, for mobility. Cardio is another time endeavor that we have to allocate time toward now. And again, as you get older, you look at time, a lot more preciously, especially as you get busier. But when you have a family and a partner and things of that nature, I'm thinking, if I'm adding in an extra hour of cardio, like for example, I had one of my classic physique guys and we were needing to make another push and debating, do I give a little bit more? He's already doing 2 days worth of cardio on his rest day. Do I allocate a little bit more there, or do we make a drop? And I'm thinking, he has just been unwell. He's got a young lad that obviously he's responsible for, him and his wife, and so he's adding more stress from a time perspective. Is that going to be better for him when we look at his entire week outlook? More time away from them? Probably not. Versus if I take out an extra 125 or 150 calories, is he really going to notice or care? Probably not. And again, if that was me, would I rather have a bit more time with my son and maybe be in my home environment? Would I rather go and do an extra 30 minutes of cardio? I think things and looking at things from a different angle, that can make a really, really big difference as well. So don't get me wrong, there's times where you just need to get the damn thing done, but equally, I think it's a tool that we use, and hopefully we use sparingly, and we use it when and if we need to.
I think you brought up a really good point about time, and that's the art of coaching, right? Is to know what to do and when to do it based on someone's situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly right. And that's something that you learn and you develop as you get older, and your practice improves, and as a practitioner you get better. But equally, I think it's also another reason why your athlete roster, you should have a good understanding of the environmental settings that your client's going through. If you're just literally looking at the spreadsheet and you're not paying any attention to, if you had no idea that your client was sick, or if they had a partner, or maybe they're having an issue with their girlfriend, or maybe their son's been sick, they're all things that the more information that you have, especially when we're working in an online setting, it's so important to have a robust system that allows you to look at the entire playing field through more or less a clearer lens.
Yeah, perfect. The only thing I do is I sometimes implement cardio earlier than what I think matters, only to build a habit. So I might put in like something really small, like 2 sessions at 15 minutes each, right? Something like really tiny, just to build them the habit of getting it done in their week. And then I'll actually then prescribe the cardio I really want to prescribe them. But I might get that done for like a week or two, just to be like, oh, okay, I've got to jump on the treadmill, I've got to jump, and just to get in the habit of, okay, now I've got to do cardio. And then once they've got that ticked off, they've got momentum, like, okay, now I really want you to do this much. So that's a little trick that sometimes I use with people, is I'll implement it early just to build a habit before I really want to implement it. Yeah.
Whoever's one of MT's athletes that got their check-in this week with 2 15-minute cardios is sitting there going, this fucking bug.
2 3.5 minute efforts on the bike.
All right, we might finish it up there, but I might leave on the last one, Scotty. People always like supplement questions. So what is the benefit of taking glutamine?
Taking glutamine. Okay. As in, is there any context around why you should have it, or they just said what's the point of having glutamine?
What's the point of having it? Yeah.
So I don't typically prescribe it for anyone. I don't think it does any harm, but basically glutamine's used more or less as a recovery tool or modality. So basically when you train, you obviously cause stress or trauma. And so it helps with that proliferation phase of muscle repair. So when you obviously create that stress, you'll usually see a bit of trauma and damage. And so in terms of seeing an increase in repair of those satellite cells, so they're basically just like stem cells on the outside of your muscle, think of them like that. And so they become activated and then they basically just differentiate into muscle cells that help with the repair. And so glutamine provides basically like the fuel for those to be able to help facilitate that. But I mean, glutamine is not an essential amino acid. We get it in a lot of the foods, in meat that we eat, in eggs. You can definitely take it, and there's definitely times where you may not get enough of it in your diet if you're potentially not eating enough of foods that contain it. So do I think glutamine, if you can afford to buy it and take it, is it helpful? For sure, especially if you're potentially being sick, or there's also some research, I think, looking at the effects that it has on, gut microbiome and things of that nature. So you can take it for that. I don't ever prescribe glutamine. I think bang for your buck, you're not probably going to get all that much out of it. You're not going to notice a massive difference, but it definitely can be, it can be beneficial if you have the funds to liberate toward it. But otherwise, you're probably going to be able to get enough of it just within your diet if you're eating a typical bodybuilding based diet.
Yeah, perfect. I was going to mention about the gut health, but you already ticked it off, because that's something, it's an uncommon thing about glutamine that people don't normally know.
There's more research looking into that now. I'm not across all of it. I know that people are starting to look at that more so, but again, for the most part, my understanding is that it is typically taken to help with that that initial proliferation phase. So to sort of help with that, I think to go into too much detail, I think it's got to do with passing on like the nitrogen atoms that are needed to build some of the nucleotide bases. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that's where it is. But again, it's been a while since I've looked at it. But for the most part, it basically just helps with that. So yeah. But equally, I definitely don't think anyone needs to go out and buy glutamine. I think if you're going to spend money on supplements, liberate your funds towards caffeine and creatine and maybe some protein powder.
Done. All right, boys. That was good. Thanks for that. Enjoy the rest of your day. MG, you can look out the window as much as you like right now.
Pretty beautiful.
It looks nice out there, bro.
Man, I tell you what, it's that's not so. Yes, it's a
Nice trees, nice and sunny, beautiful.
nice day here in Briar Hill.
Beautiful looking fence. I love it.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, boys. I'll speak to you. See you guys.
Take care, guys.
Bye.